Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of the Roga podcast. As you already know, this is the episode where we're going to be interviewing me. So I'd like to introduce you to someone special. This is Hannah.
Hey, how's it going, Ian?
Great. Thanks for working with us today, Hannah. Hannah actually works with Roga, helping us with our communications, and is also someone who's got her own story to tell with stress and anxiety in the past. So, very much part of the team. I thought it'd be great to share my story as part of the Roga podcast. I have an interesting background, I think, that led me to join the team at Roga that dips into both the startup and business world and also the world of very deep, dark anxiety. So lots to talk about. But Hannah, it would be great for everyone to know a little bit about you. So could you give yourself an introduction?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Well, I'm excited to be interviewing you today. I feel like we've talked like 1,000 times about stress and anxiety, so it's actually kind of funny to have this recorded for everyone else to hear. So hopefully it's a good podcast for anyone listening. But I work with the Roga team. I do some of the communications and marketing, and I'm really excited to be part of the Roga project and the team in general, because I think what you're doing to try to combat stress and anxiety and burnout is super critical. I've worked with startups for long enough to know that it can be really, really stressful. And I'm not even that old. So it can be really, work in general can be a super stressful environment. And, from everything from like, I used to work in restaurants for a while, like through college and a little bit afterwards. And I've like freelanced and I've worked with CEOs at startups. I've worked in Washington, D.C. I've worked in a bunch of different environments, and workplace stress is just something that doesn't seem to care what industry you're in or what your role is or what your job is. You've always got something that's, like grinding on you and following you around after you leave the office. And it's always just like, you can't sleep, or you're worried about like, oh, did I mess this up? Or, it's like, there's just always that kind of stress that happens. So, anyways, Roga's awesome. And I'm really excited to be, helping work on the team and part of the project. But enough about me. I would love to, I'm here to talk about you. So, I know, which is great. I feel like we should have like, cappuccinos and a croissant here or something.
And like that would be nice.
Being like, have like little bistro tables, have a little cafe vibe. But,
well, I'm hoping that your dog comes back and joins us. We had a little puppy in the background just a little while ago.
I know. So if you see this like corner of the screen gets occupied by a puppy that keeps changing positions because she's napping all day, then that's my dog, and she's amazing. And she also has anxiety, which is just like innate to her breed. But okay, cool. So I love this idea of talking about workplace stress and anxiety. And I remember we were chatting earlier about your background, which is super interesting. And, everyone on the Roga team has had some experience with like burnout or stress or anxiety in different ways, shapes, and forms. But yours is a pretty interesting story. So I would love to kind of kick it off and just start maybe from the beginning of like, when did you first start having anxiety? Like, have you always been an anxious person or stressed out person or worried person? Has that always been an issue for you?
I think that's a really interesting question. When we look back at these timelines, I think it's easy in hindsight to see the thread tied together, and you're like, yeah, I've had anxiety since I was 2 because I remember having a really stressed out time at that age and stuff like that. But in actuality, I didn't really know that I had problems with stress and anxiety until it really like crippled me at a point like actually more recently in my history. But looking back, I can see that there was a predisposition to being debilitated by stress from a very young age, and also I hadn't like really effectively developed the best coping mechanisms, and so there were times all through my life when I think I encountered it. But Yeah,
Hmm.
I think I first noticed that I had a problem with stress in high school when, funny story, my hair started going grey when I was about 15, because
Wait,
I was
really?
just, yeah, I was just so.
Was it because of stress? Like you were just so stressed out your hair was turning gray? Or is that like your parents have gray hair early or something?
That's actually the second one is what I thought it was at the time.
Hmm.
But a couple of years ago now, there was a couple of studies into this, and it was found that the grey hair gene is a thing, but the thing that triggers it is stress or age. And being at the age of 15, I don't think it was age, so it was definitely stress. It was just the same
Mm,
stress that I think a lot of young adults experience with the pressure of getting into a good college, studying what they want to do, being competitive. So nothing really out of the ordinary for what is just a normal everyday experience of being young, but was kind of a warning flag that didn't really go recognized at the time.
wow. So your hair was like actually just turning gray.
Yeah, I had like 20% of my hair gray and I would pull it out every day. I think my girlfriend at the
Gosh,
time was very useful to me by getting the tweezers out and pulling them out.
that's so funny. I do that now, but I can't blame it on. I don't think I can blame
We
it
all
on
do.
the same things anymore. Um, but that's wild. Did you ever like go and talk to a doctor? Did you like tell your parents or anything? Did you look it up and see what was going on? And like,
Yeah, I think I had talked to a counselor at one point during high school, and not actually high school, during primary school when I had changed schools. And it's stressful as a kid to like lose all your friends and have to make friends and stuff like that. But I'd never really gone to them and said, "Hey, I have a problem," because I didn't really know it
mm,
was normal. I think it's probably pretty common. Um, just thought it was like the vicissitudes of growing up. But the first time I went to a doctor and had that kind of frank, open conversation in those terms was actually in college, when I had to apply for special consideration, like an extension on an assignment,
mm,
because I was just so stressed out. And a lot of it, looking back, was self inflicted, or just overestimating how much I could deal with stress when I was taking on like full time study at the same time as full time work and side hustles and social life as well. Probably also pretty common among young people. But
yeah.
yeah, that was the first time I ever really had a conversation about specifically the word anxiety, or even serious stress or burnout.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I feel like there's a point. Maybe you have this moment too where it's like the terms anxiety and stress don't aren't really in your conscious as a young person. And then there's a point where like you kind of hear them and they don't really you're like, no, that's not really what it is. But and then there's like all of a sudden it's like it clicks and you're like, oh, that's that feeling that I have
Mm.
sometimes, or like this describes my like always like feeling like I'm overwhelmed or something like that. You don't necessarily like even if the vocabulary is there, it doesn't always seem to sit and apply.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, no,
yeah,
that resonates a lot.
yeah. So how? Okay, so you're like in college and you kind of like finally start to have these open conversations, and so you realize that that's an issue. Did did it continue to be an issue? Did you ever like try to fix it or manage it in any
Yeah.
way? Did you go to Bali and take some meditation classes? Like,
I think being young, you think you're invincible, right? And I'm sure that sounds rich coming from someone who's like before the age of 30 anyway. But I'm definitely still learning. But at that time, I had so much to learn about just being able to recognize my limits and look after myself. And so no, I didn't really like honestly try to fix it at that time. I think
hmm,
medicated it with all of the combination that we all seek in youth of socialization, alcohol, like running around doing everything fun all the time, no sleep. But it didn't really matter because I was just studying, and the work that I was doing was kind of freelance work. I was only doing occasionally little like professional sojourns with like working in the court, as like a legal practice test thing. So it wasn't really in any like a high like responsibility in any part of my life. And I think that combined with being young meant that I didn't really seek serious help. But it did get pretty debilitating, and there were definitely times when it was like 3 days of staying in bed and not knowing why, thinking I was fine, not really thinking, oh, this
Mhm.
is a problem I need to fix, but just going through
Wow.
that roller coaster. But it was when I did the thing that I did after college, which was start a very serious business, that it really started to be a thing that I had to figure out how to address.
Hmm. And so what tell me about the business. What business was that?
Yeah, I had run a couple of little businesses in my time in law school, which kind of gave me an insight into the fact that I think I'm more suited and more enjoy that kind of style of work where you're building something from scratch and operating out of the kind of like normal professional office circumstance to do things that are what I consider more interesting for me. And so I had some experience with business, but I had never started a business that was really serious. Like I had run a lighting and sound company previously that was like verging on serious. We were just about to graduate college when we all founded that. And that was the first time that I ever took an investor for that business and stuff like that. But immediately after finishing college, actually dropping out of college to do this business, I founded a company called Hum that was a neurotechnology business. It's something that's contrary to my education, law, and science. It was a neuroscience business building a product to help people with memory conditions and healthy people to get better outcomes in day to day life, just out of getting better memory. And that company was the first time that I had ever really, had people seriously counting on me. And was
Mm.
also the first time that I was really pushed to my limits in terms of what I was good at and what I wasn't good at. So that's the first time when I really encountered a serious problem that I needed to fix.
Okay, so and what so give us a sense, when was this? Like was this like last year, or what was this time that you were founding Hum?
Yeah, I founded that company with a couple of co-founders who were my best friends way back in like 2017. And we were still working on our other jobs and projects and college at the time, but it became really serious in 2018, and we actually ended up moving from Perth in Western Australia, where I'm from, to here in the San Francisco Bay to work with the lab and to take on some investors that were based over here, including UT Berkeley. So in about 2018, started to get really serious. And the
Okay.
next couple of years of my life were some of the best and some of the hardest as well because of the stress
Mhm.
involved in that business.
So you guys were so did you like get a bunch of investors and you started growing? Like what happened in the business at that time? And also what was your role? Were you a C-suite at that point, or
Yeah, we were all co-founders with kind of an equal level of responsibility to start. But
okay.
over time, I think the role of CEO, which is what I was, becomes more and more serious as you start taking on more responsibility. And like you
Sure.
mentioned, investors come into the picture, and people really look to you for leadership. And I had always kind of naturally ended up in leadership positions because I'm a little bit bossy and stuff like that in the past,
You're
and
not
often
bossy
have.
at all, Ian. You're gently suggestive in a forceful sort of way.
I like that. I'm going to use that. And also,
Yeah, you should
I come up with
put
like
that on your personal website.
ideas. Yeah. And I think the other reason I had ended up in leadership positions was just coming up with a lot of ideas and not knowing how to execute them. So you need to get other people involved to help, right? So I don't think it was like a position that I was uniquely qualified for. Rather, it was a position that I just kind of ended up in, and it made the most sense.
Yeah. I think
And
that's how most, like, a lot of businesses, small businesses, startups, it's sort of like, well, I guess you're the this thing and I'm the that thing, and we're just gonna figure it out and see what we can do, right?
yeah, yeah. And we had some success with that business, and I did I think do a good job for quite a few years of running it. But the business didn't end up being successful, and that's kind of one of the things that caused the most stress. But
It
yeah, I
didn't
was a
end up being
CEO, and
successful.
it didn't. No, as many startups do,
Wow.
it failed, and it failed during COVID. So between 2018 and kind of end of 2021, that's the journey that we went through.
Wow. Okay, so you this was like during COVID, like we remember those times, March 2020 times. That was like an insanely bad. I mean, that was a bad time for like a lot of people for a lot of different reasons, and a
Mhm.
super stressful time regardless. But so did your business, like, what happened? Did it run out of money, or did you guys, like, did people quit? Was it shut down because it was an in-person business? Like, what happened?
Yeah, I think it's important context to know. So we were doing something called a moonshot, which if you haven't heard of that before, is just something that's so crazy that it sounds impossible, and most people would consider it impossible. But you're intending to do it because if it works, the outcome is amazing.
Right.
For us, the what we were trying to build was a closed loop brain computer interface technology, something that can read and write to the brain. And read means tell what's going on in the brain, what's like the performance of your memory, for example. And write means actually cause changes to come about so that you can improve people's memory in our instance. But there are lots of other applications of this technology, obviously. We pivoted multiple times over the years, but we were, in the end, really building a device and a piece of software that would pair with your brain, worn as a patch that you could wear daily at times when you needed to improve your memory performance. And so we
Hmm.
went through this long journey of trying to figure out what the right product for that was to start with. Like we went from esports computer gamers trying to win games to white collar professionals working on like C-suite jobs, and
Wow.
everything in between. And the technology itself also shifted over time. At its core, though, what we were doing was we were doing something called brain stimulation, similar to what Roga does, where we put electricity into the brain and the nervous system. And so we did trials, like scientific trials, overseen by university professors. We partnered directly with labs. We built commercial devices. We did like the really scrappy part of the startup stuff too, where we would like go to conferences and just talk to people, show them prototypes. It was this
Yeah.
big journey, but very ambitious, and some would say destined to fail from the start, because it's so ambitious and so crazy to build something like that. Um, and I think the like difficulty that arose came from a combination of that, how hard it was, and then also COVID. But basically, we ran into every possible problem that you can imagine. I think, or I'm sure there are much worse things that can happen too. But we had problems with people needing to leave the country because of COVID. We had problems with people burning out from stress. We had problems with technology working, not working, that kind of thing. Prototypes over time increase or decrease in performance. And we had problems with, we were all just figuring it out as we went along, and no one had ever done
Right.
anything like that before. So
Right.
we were really figuring it out for the first time.
Yeah. I mean, seriously, talk about something that like causes stress or worry, not having a blueprint, not knowing what the future is going to hold. Like I get stressed out if I don't know what I'm having for lunch sometimes, So um, I can't imagine having to do it with, an entire business or knowing like, what's going to impact it during COVID. I mean, I think for all of us, like all of us have that thing too, where like we know where we were when the shelter in place happened. Everyone has that like their story about that, and the like sense of just everything all of a sudden went from like planning your life out in like, oh, we're going to do something in the summer or the winter or next year I'll do XYZ, to like, how am I going to get groceries tomorrow? Like things that you didn't have to really, think about previously,
Mm,
like a super challenge. So, I mean, and like on a personal level where like I can't imagine having that for a job as well.
And it's hard to talk about, isn't it? Like even mentioning that you get anxious, like thinking about what to eat for lunch, not something we just like talk about like super openly, but let alone when you're heading a business and you need everyone to feel like the company's going to succeed. You need to motivate people. You want to
You need
give
to
a
give this like
professional
air of
image and stuff.
confidence or something. Like you
Exactly, and
can't
it can be
seem
really
like the
complicated.
person who's anxious or something. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
you've got
totally.
to figure out how to let people know it's going to be okay, even though sometimes you don't feel like it's going to be okay. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's, I mean, that's like a leadership skill. And I think it's like, I mean, yeah, I don't know how like people like have this like brave face or something, but also like, I think even, I mean, was the pressure of feeling like you had to put on this like brave face and be the like not anxious person for everyone else? Do you think that actually like contributed to it? Did that make it harder?
I think it does, and I think that's one of the big missions at Rogo and of this podcast, right? Like to make it more possible to feel the absence of stigma in talking about these things, because talking about them openly is the best way to solve them. Um, And for me at that time, that just wasn't a world that I think I had played the words out of my mouth, of it's important to talk about mental health, and it's important to be like open and communicate and support each other. but really being able to like share deeply what I was feeling and how it was affecting me was something that I wasn't prepared to do at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, I don't, it's kind of an interesting question if it's like, is that something that's always, is it always helpful to share that? And then, like, is it helpful to share it with your team? Are they going to feel stressed out because they know that you're stressed out? Like, if you're worried, are they going to take on your worry too? And or is it like something, that is like, is that just something you like share with your partner or your therapist, or like you just scream it into a pillow when you go to sleep? Like,
Mm,
like what is what level of being open about our anxiety is appropriate? And, like how do we feel like we're actually like seen and accepted and heard? Like people aren't, expecting us to be, like non-feeling people. Like we show up at work every day and we're not like we're just like hiding behind Slack and email and Zoom,
mm,
and like we might be super stressed out and people have no idea, you know?
mm. Yeah,
So
yeah, really interesting. I think we as a society have a lot to figure out about how we do these things properly in a way that really is helpful. But to start off with, I feel like just talking more about it is an
yeah.
important first step. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is I totally agree with you. So tell us a little bit about, okay, what happened? This company failed. Your company failed at like the worst kind of possible time, and
Mm,
like you were already dealing with anxiety. That sounds like it caused more anxiety. How did
totally.
you Yeah, what happened? How did you kind of move forward with your life after that?
Yeah, and I think, looking back again, like we mentioned with the stories of childhood, like it fits into this cohesive story, but at the time it was just really confusing. And so, although it sounds neatly packaged and this happened, at the time, I think the experience is one of just pure confusion, isn't it? Um,
Right, right.
the
Yeah.
story the story for me begins in kind of the end of 2019. One of my co-founders in my previous business made the personal decision that he wanted to be based back in Australia, to be with his family, and that kind of like changed the game for our business. Just comes at the same time as one of my other co-founders was having a lot of trouble with burnout and stress, and very much his own interesting journey with that. But what happened was that we started to, I think, just not handle our stress as well. Whereas previously we had, as a company, been really small. All of a sudden we were growing really fast. We had taken on significant investment. COVID dropped at the same time as all of this happened, and the stress levels just went through the roof, with all of these other things compounding on top. Um, and basically, like for the next 20 months or so, 18 months, that level of stress just continued to rise in me, and my burnout continued to get worse. And so, although I was already pretty burned out in like March of 2020 and struggling to try and figure out what to do about it, starting to talk to therapists and things like that, it didn't actually come to a head until about November 2020, kind of towards the end of the year, when a full year of burnout and trying to work as hard as possible, nonetheless, in any case, was just all of a sudden too much, and I had to take like a week and a half off work at a moment's notice because I had just burned out so much that I couldn't function properly, couldn't think properly. And at that point, really started to take it seriously, and started to try and seek help and share more about it. But thinking in hindsight, I still could have done a lot better, and that benefit of the experience of going through this is what um, is now makes me feel like I can share this as a story that I've learned from. Um, yeah, so between November 2020 and kind of August 2021, I was sitting at this state of trying as hard as I could to do anything about burnout, while simultaneously also encountering, an increasingly difficult business environment with money dwindling, and supply chain delays and things like that as a result of COVID just being awful and debilitating our ability to produce our hardware and get it prototyped and shipped.
And
And on
that's
top of
just
that,
like
we also,
adding to stress.
Yeah.
as you're actively trying to combat your stress, it's just piling it on.
Yeah. Yeah. And, we were doing lots of things to try and help, but they just weren't enough. Like we were a really good team, I think, in that company of like supporting each other, but it just wasn't possible to overcome the burnout. And the business, like I said, was a really hard business. It was always really unlikely we were going to be able to succeed in building what we wanted to build. It didn't end up working out that we were able to ship the product because we got delayed by several things, including regulatory considerations um, and supply chain hardware and money problems. But it came to a head for me personally in kind of August and September of 2021. And that's when I burned out really, really hard. And that was the first time that I had to like go and like get emergency help for this stuff,
Gosh.
which is something that happens to a lot of people, but is really awful to go through.
Is that like, I mean, not to get like super personal, but I'm curious because when you're saying like we say burnout is this term, and I feel like it can look like a lot of different things, and it's like, I mean, also for folks if they don't know whether they're burning out or not, like what were you experiencing when you say you had burnout? Like, were you not able to sleep? Were you like, what was going on?
Yeah,
Like, were you just like had no energy? And then like when you had to seek emergency help, like what was that? Was that like a panic attack? Like what was actually
yeah.
going on for you?
Yeah, I've had panic attacks at several points in my life, but they've been pretty rare. And they were more like I just was in like a crazy stressful situation in a relationship or something like that. And I didn't look at it at the time as a panic attack. Now I see that they were. But all of a sudden, kind of at the very end of last year, I started to have them daily and wasn't able to think rationally or talk properly for, an hour or two. And in a totally remote workplace, that means like rescheduling Zoom meetings and things like that, and just going and lying down, trying to keep it together. Um, but in the context of a business that's running out of money, it means trying as hard as you can to try and set deadlines and find more money for the company and stuff like that, while simultaneously just being unable to conduct that level of work, which is a pretty high level of stress that you need to be able to deal with to be able to do work like that and be successful. So it looked like just basically being like debilitated and not being able to make progress day to day. And yeah, it meant that I couldn't sleep because I would just have this like knot of worry, which is one of the symptoms of anxiety. And it also meant that a lot of the like creativity and fun part of running a business or doing a startup was just robbed. I didn't have that like happy time that you usually have in order to make such a stressful job more worth it.
Wow. So it's like, sometimes like when you feel like you're in flow state or all the good parts about work, like that's just gone. It was just like, just awful all the time.
Yeah, and definitely stems into personal life of already when you're running a startup, your personal life and professional life are so closely tied together. But you do have relationships that are separate and stuff, and I just stopped being able to maintain those relationships. And it becomes this negative cycle, right? Of like you're robbing yourself of your support mechanisms, and also the work and stuff are getting harder because you're getting more delayed and more stressed and unable to do things. So an awful situation to be in. But
Yeah.
yeah, glad
It's
to be
like a
able to say that I
totally compounding situation too.
yeah, yeah. And so that the emergency help to seek at that point is calling a doctor and saying, "Hey, I think I'm having like something like a mental breakdown," which sounds like crazy words to come out of your mouth, but I think it's important to be able to say them sometimes if that's what's happening. And like I
Yeah. Or
need
you can just say like
medication. I need
something's wrong with me. Like say it however you want, but something is like, I need help. Something's, I don't feel myself. Like,
yeah.
whatever
And
that
like a
is.
lot
Yeah.
of people, I had COVID by this point too. So I had like some of the symptoms of long COVID, like high heart rate and occasional respiratory problems. So it was hard to distinguish what was what. But this is the point when I go to a doctor and I say, "Hey, I'm having breathing problems sometimes. Like I don't know if that's a panic attack or a COVID thing. I'm having like the inability to sleep for days on end and stuff like that, and I need emergency help." And like, what do we do? And that's the point that medication comes into the picture, and the point that like other interventions like that start to come up.
Wow. That sounds like it was a really tough like phase of your, I mean, what like this is not, I mean, we all see like startup founders and we think like, we see an IPO and you see them like making all this money and like becoming famous and stuff, but like we don't see them, you know, going to a hospital with a panic attack.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, and
like
unfortunately, I think it's
you,
a really common part of it that just gets left out of the conversation. I have
yeah, I
another
was just
friend
gonna
at the
ask, like,
moment going through it.
do you think that this is just like people just don't talk it? Like, do you think this just happens all the time and people just don't talk about it?
I think it does happen all the time and people don't talk about it. I think it happens at the level of seriousness that I had it, which was I consider more on the serious end. But I also think that there are, circumstances that made my situation worse. Like I had moved country recently. I was isolated during COVID and stuff. But then also worse happens too. Like people actually commit suicide when their businesses fail or they hit major like snags in life like this. So yeah, I think full spectrum and relative to how much it happens and how awful it is for many people, I don't think we talk about it nearly enough. And therefore, it becomes even more of a stigma because it's scary to bring it up because it just has so many potential implications in people's minds that it could be seen as a thing that is weird if no one's talking about it because no one
Right.
else has said that it happened to them.
Right.
So I
You
think
don't
it's
want to be
important
the
to bring it up.
first one to say that that you had this going on or something, but the more people that are actually able to share about it, the better.
Yeah, and it's very much like a culture that needs to be balanced a bit better. I think the startup like hustle culture, because it
Yeah.
does lead to this kind of burnout, and it's fine to glorify the short nights of sleep and other things and have fun with it, but it does also need to come with an awareness and an equal openness and celebration of the fact that failure sucks and like we can help each other with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you brought that up because that's something that I feel like is always like so many of these articles that I see or like it's like people are just like, look at how little sleep I got. Look at how little free time I have and all the productivity apps. I'm like, that is giving me anxiety just like looking at your calendar. Like I don't even want to see it. I'm not even you and I'm stressed out for you. Like I'm empathy stressed out. So
Yeah,
that's like a really big, that's a really big call out
I think
about that.
there's a special stigma with starting founding a venture business as well too because it is honestly like a privilege to be able to do something like that. It means that you've got the capital resources on hand to know that if you really fail, you'll be okay. Some people don't even have that and they still go ahead, and a lot of respect for those people. But I had a supportive family that put me through education that meant that I knew that I could fall back on a career, and so I think some element of it is that we're worried about acknowledging our privilege when we talk about putting ourselves in such a stressful situation, but
Yeah.
it nonetheless is really important. And startups are a force for good in the world, so it would be bad to discourage people from doing them by having them burn out and say, "I'm never touching that again." I think better to have a culture that we can talk openly about these things and go on these journeys together and celebrate the ability to succeed and fail. Yeah.
Right. Well, and it's also like making it more sustainable. Like having it be, like we can push boundaries and we can do moonshots and all that good stuff, but like not at the expense of people, having panic attacks and like having to go to the hospital because of it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um,
And
wow.
that very like conversation that we're having about this needing to be more of a thing that we talk about is the conversation that I had with the founders of Roga, Ellison and Army, that brought me to work at this company.
Right.
Um, and so,
They both
for
had like
example,
work related stress too, right?
and them sharing their own version of my story in different parts of their lives. Army with his work at Google, and Allison with her condition that she ran into, where she had an immune condition. Those stories were equally as awful to hear about as talking about my own problem, and that kind of solidarity that I built with them, of someone understands what I went through. We're talking about this openly. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Oh, and by the way, we could found a company where we're actually go and try and fix that problem for people. That's what got me excited about working at Roga.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So tell us a little bit about the what the product means for you, how it's maybe, I know you've used it. How has it helped you? Has
Yeah,
it become
yeah.
like a really good solution?
I had known Army and Ellison for a while and heard of their product and seen prototypes of it because, we went to the same kind of conferences and things like that, given that it's in a similar industry. But I hadn't really considered using the Roga device until I started having options like medication in my life and considering what I wanted to do. The device came at a perfect time for me. I met Alison and Army. I was also approaching them, as like a peer, wanting to talk about what we could do together in the space because I wanted to continue my work with brain stimulation and with hum. And was pleasantly surprised to hear from them that they had made a lot of progress building their device and got to try it. And the device to me was a godsend. It meant that I was able to, over the course of the next 4 months, actually get my stress and burnout back to a stage where I didn't feel the need to be on medication anymore. And working with them on improving it also invigorating because I'm able to continue work on the same technology I'd been building at my previous company, which I feel like has an incredible potential to help human beings.
Yeah.
But yeah, at this point, I've been working with the company for now about 6 months, and we've come out of stealth and are now sharing this podcast and that our product is coming to the market and stuff like that. So it feels really good to be at this point, having conquered that deep level of burnout that I had, and now being able to come and help other people with that problem.
Yeah, I mean it's amazing to I'm sure people that you meet now would have no idea that you went through this experience because just talking to you seems so kind of calm and with it, and you just seem like a cool Aussie, so it's it'd be hard to imagine that. So it's it actually gives me a lot of, I don't know, hope and kind of inspiration to see that you know like you had this awful startup experience, you had this awful workplace failure happen, which is probably a lot of people's deepest darkest fear. That is absolutely worst case scenario. They probably wouldn't admit it, but that's probably their biggest fear, right? And you had that happen to you and had to shut everything down, start again at zero, and
Yeah,
really do it all
totally.
over again.
I mean, there's a lot to it, right? People probably worry about their financial circumstances and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
running into the ground in a startup, I had the choice of investing all my own cash because I believed in it so much, and I went ahead without thinking. And now it's damn, that was a big decision that I didn't really think about very hard. But I burned all of my savings on that and put myself in a spot where I was really lucky to find Roga too, because I didn't want to I wasn't ready to go and work in a corporate job just instantaneously and operate at my best. That was part of it. But also, I wanted to continue working on what I'd put so much time and effort and personal sacrifice into too. So it was really cool to be able to join Roga.
Yeah. Well, I'm super glad that we have you. That we have you working on this, and now you actually get to take part of your experience and go and try to build a product that's going to hopefully help others that are in the same position that you are in.
Yeah, and that experience informs my work daily. My job at Roga is the head of growth, so it's about bringing the product to the attention of people and then helping them become users. And I work closely with the content team building what's in our app, which is content, video, and audio to help you with the symptoms of stress, burnout, and anxiety, and help you work on it and become less burned out, less stressed, and less anxious, all above. And then also the hardware team, where we're building a device.
Do they have a session yet on fear of podcasts?
That's a great idea.
If not, yeah, we should totally do that one.
It feels like every man and his dog has a podcast these days, so
I know.
It's probably a big market.
What to do when you are nervous for your upcoming podcast recording? I have a feeling we're going to start needing that in a week or 2 weeks. So,
true. Yeah.
No,
but
it is, it's a super cool app with lots of there's so much good content that could help really anyone in experiencing all these different flavors of stress and anxiety.
Yeah, and it's I tell you what, one of the things that is the best that's happened to me out of this like overall really difficult experience is realizing that one of my missions in life, if not my mission in life, is to help people go through like these kinds of hard experiences and come out stronger. And being able to work on a product like this day to day is like an awesome opportunity to be surrounded by great people like yourself and Army and Allison, who are of like mind. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the cool thing about Roga too is just that's like it's truly built by and for people that are going through these experiences. Like everybody at Roga has like some flavor of these stories. And so it's also like it's great to have, it's great to have them and have you sharing your story and just like making us not feel so alone or not so weird for being in those positions, or having like when you have the thought of like, oh my god, do I need to quit, like do I need to cut back my hours, how am I going to manage all of this, like not that's not as uncommon. And
Mm.
also like read less of those articles about how to be a morning person and wake up at 4 a.m. and like conquer your to-do list and all that stuff, because that stuff just
Yep.
stresses me out.
Yeah, you gotta if you're gonna read them, you gotta balance it out with how to like live a less stressed life that you're.
Sleep in. Yeah.
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 Yeah, well, cool. Thanks for,
um
thanks for giving me the opportunity to tell my story.
Yeah, thank you so much for talking about this, Ian, and sharing your story with all the listeners for Roga. We're really excited to have the device get to a lot of people and be able to help them with their workday stress or all types of stress. And yeah, looking forward to the next podcast. I hope we'll see you soon
Great.
on the show.
Yeah, and it's great to have you now joining us as one of the podcast hosts, and looking forward to getting other people involved. Thanks for listening to this podcast. There are many people who have stories that are really interesting, probably more interesting than my story, right? So we would encourage anyone who has a story to share to reach out. We want to have you on the podcast. And also, we want to help other companies and people who are like us trying to help people with this stuff. So any collaborators, whether they're existing clinics or companies that want to offer this to their staff as a wellness tool to help them through difficult times that we're all going through now, please get in touch. So yeah, thanks, Hannah, and look forward to talking to everyone again soon.
Thanks, Ian. Bye.